Shane Bruce here. I am reading a complaint. I'm a plaintiff litigant suing in federal court, and I'm just going to read this 15-page amended complaint. Shane Bruce versus Great Britain, British BP PLC, British Petroleum and subsidiaries, Sir John Sawyer's, American Medical Association, American Association of Poison Control Center, Center of Disease Control, National Institute of Health, Office of Secretary of Defense James Mattis, University of Tennessee Medical Center, Gregory A. Finch, PA, University of Infectious Disease, Stephen Teague, MD, UT Family Physicians, La Follette, Lori P. Stoudemire, MD, Christian Terzin, MD, Tenova La Follette Medical Center Clinic, Jeffrey Nitz, Tennessee Cardiology, La Follette Medical Center, Tenova Health, et al. Amended complaint has several addresses here of all the defendants. Straight on to Roman numeral number 1, jurisdiction of the United States courts. I, this plaintiff, Shane Maddox Bruce, paragraph 1. I, this plaintiff, Shane Maddox Bruce, as a citizen of the United States, former officer of service, brings a civil action against the defendants for restitution on those liabilities incurred by the defendants in several tortious actions, including conspiracy to violate civil and constitutional rights, malicious malpractice, and fraud. Paragraph 2. The malpractice of the healthcare providers and associated healthcare organizations made improper assessments, false reporting, and false diagnoses, skewed protocols, attempted censorship, and provided misinformation, substituting improper testing of heavy metals and their negligence by malice and fraudulent, refusing to relatively simple cures while not cured creates billing weeks, months, or years, and billing long-term chronic, even emergency health conditions, directing patients in an insolvent circular references and repetitious needless test procedures. Not curing cause continued harm to their patients. Their associations listen to their members' collusion, presenting disinformation as a group to defraud, perhaps to attempt massive nationwide liabilities. No matter their reasons, defendants are treble liable for damages by the False Claims Act and various acts governing Medicare providers to the United States government. Each offense faces penalties of $21,562.80 per needless test, treatment, plus treble damages for any unnecessary medical cost, the total of which this plaintiff is entitled to 30%, as individuals are allowed to litigate on behalf of the U.S. Paragraph 3. That the healthcare provider defendants from long neglect due not only to patient dumping, 42 U.S. Code Section 1395 DD of the collective medical community of poisons and heavy metal overdose victims of the U.S. citizens from the BP actions in the Gulf of Mexico, which this plaintiff is a member. Appropriate treatments are guaranteed by and administered by the Social Security Act by several, each and every law applicable, including the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, Hill-Burton Act, Federal Civil Rights Law, and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. The Americans with Disabilities Act, where liabilities by those defendants incurred, and there is an additional penalty of $25,000 imposed by the courts on each offending member of the medical community. Paragraph 4. Conspiracy by the defending healthcare providers while neglecting a duty towards care, where only the necessary treatments of the only known antidote to poisons is that of IV chelation therapy, with no or very limited drawbacks and no side effects. Prolonging or, by association, trading client relationships, never meeting the promises of treatment. Elemental poisoning is a secret cash cow of a fraudulent medical community. Display complete lack of medical incompetence is a ruse, but I caught them in several faucets and intentional misleading diagnoses and treatment. Such ignorance wasn't plausible by medical professionals, and such neglect is intentional. Restatement of Tort, Section 46. They knew the dangers. Liabilities due from intentional malpractices cannot be otherwise negotiated except by that of civil action, which is in the jurisdiction of the United States courts. Paragraph 5. Such corrupted healthcare associations and healthcare practitioners who've attempted to lobbied legislations and attempts to influence the U.S. government population of the United States, as have international oil in a massive attempt to spread disinformation and censor the heavy metal contamination, are not only tortious failure to warn, Restatement of Tort Section 18, but intentional denying of real dangers for the purposes of fraud on their own, and has been further subverted by co-defendants external to the U.S. to censor the sources of heavy metal poisoning by agencies and organs of Great Britain, which would show long-range planning of a binary tact of introducing heavy metals and withholding antidote. Even the individual healthcare providers have attempted to censor that source of heavy metals. Censorship and misinformation, even by those defendants, in this case as is following, like actions being collusion, Restatement of Torts, Section 878, Concurrent Consecutive Acts, aiding and abetting those criminal actions of the obstruction by BP, become intentional, opening such to liabilities by Restatement of Torts, Section 435B, as those intentional tortfeasors by JASTA. JASTA is the Justice Against Sponsored Terrorism Act from 2017. It's a new act. Therefore, the liability by the defendants is incurred as intentional conspirators and co-conspirators to violate constitutional and civil rights, surviving poison despite the defendants' resulting chaos. Paragraph 6. Those foreign states and organs of those foreign states intentionally and criminally devised and acted a way to introduce several heavy metal, elemental, and other poisons, RST Section 435B, intentional tortfeasor liability, into the Gulf of Mexico, and as carried by the air and rain at least 100 miles beyond the coastlines, RST Section 46, deliberate disregard, poisoning peoples of the United States of America and other countries around the Gulf of Mexico, including myself, this plaintiff, of which Great Britain, British Petroleum, and other subsidiaries are liable by the Justice Against Sponsored Terrorism Act, JSTA, of 2016, which extends the period of liability to 10 years and multiplies liability of damages. This complaint is also brought by tort law, 18 U.S.C. Section 2333A, civil remedies for terror victims, and 28 U.S.C. 1331. The plaintiff requests the U.S. courts exercise its jurisdiction over the international matters of litigation as founded upon 28 U.S.C. 1331 and all matters of variety, Article 3, Section 2, Maritime, Act 46 U.S.C. Section 30101, Chapter 3, Section 23, and each and every law that might apply to my civil suit, taking exceptions of 28 U.S.C. Section 1605A2 and 28 U.S.C. Section 1603A. Paragraph 7. That the defendants of the conspiracy and other tortious actions, harms, and neglect for which this plaintiff asking restitution for a false expensive compensation for personal injury, expenses, loss of income, other monies which the defendants are jointly and several liable, proportions of accountability of liabilities to be determined. Roman numeral number 2, factual accounting. Paragraph 1. This plaintiff now brings new information of public interest to the source of heavy metals by misuse of the microbes to cause harm by BP plc, that BP plc, an organ of Britain, are international tortfeasors, caused harm by means of a genetically modified microbe engineered from Oleospira antarctica, one of 4 petroleum microbes they've in constant use. Paragraph 1a. Where those petroleum microbes introduced and cultured in the Deepwater Horizon oil well, where they geometrically increase the pressure some several million pascals in the oil well until it finally exploded on April 20th, 2010. Essentially a microbial fuse of non-pyrotechnic bomb which exploded in an estimated 200 million gallons up to 1 billion gallons of oil, nearly fully cultured with genetically modified microbes, merely 40 miles from the United States coast of Louisiana. Paragraph 1b. BP plc pled criminally guilty, thereby intentional tortfeasors, to its illegal conduct in the explosion, including felony obstruction to their Deepwater Horizon oil well explosion and resulting in further consequences in the United States versus BP Exploration and Production Incorporated in 2013, where high-level executives in BP plc were charged with intentional misleading, falsifying several acts of the explosion. That was the 200th year anniversary of the War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain. That damages not only to civilian populations, but to the majority of military targets of the United States coastal defense facilities and shipyards along the aerospace corridor, though limited to those exposed to those rainwaters and protecting the flora, fauna, and possibly flora, local flora. Paragraph C. The reports of petroleum microbe noticed as present was being introduced as bioremediation in the oil spill are intentional further falsehoods from the BP plc. The oil from the Deepwater Horizon was already completely cultured with the petroleum microbe at the time of the explosion. The continued pattern of causal harm as some type of aid, hiding causal harm as some type of aid, using rhetoric of false aid as a ruse to obfuscate further levels of harm, steadily manipulating the situation. Paragraph D. It is widely known since at least 1984 and the purported by the defendants BP plc that the genetically modified petroleum microbes are used to increase pressure and decrease the viscosity of the oil wells as they tear apart, or in the oil industry language, degrade non-organic compounds and elemental parts. Essentially, it mines out elements from mineral deposits from the subtle land matter of the ocean floor or walls of the tapped oil reservoir and makes them smaller particulate of free radicals, a reactive gas or liquid. Free radicals are a substance ready to instantly bind, having an ionic imbalance, a ready chemical reaction waiting to happen, which immediately and aggressively binds on contact with human beings, progressively so and intractable until chelation therapy. Paragraph E. There being already a free radical element, heavy metals, and elemental toxins oil when issued from the explosion site is already a given, though in greater quantities in the raw oil than BP or PLC or the AMA would admit. They've falsely claimed minuscule. Paragraph F. BP plc then enlisted to cap and clean up the oil instead of the U.S. agency and proceeded to dump more than 1 million gallons of what was called a dispersant corexit, also toxin in itself, but not to be confused with the heavy metal poisons, which is only a step of the method which causes the oil to precipitate or drop like rain to the bottom where it settles on the ocean floor sediment. Paragraph G. By using corexit, BP not only caused that bacterial activated reactive oil to come in contact with the ocean floor sediment. The BP plc is full aware of its own technology and what the results would be. Millions of tons of oil fully cultured with bacteria, that those microbes then microscopically churn the sediment of the ocean as it mined minerals, casting off many tons of dangerous elemental toxins of heavy metals, including that of manganese and arsenic. BP's two-part enterprise, a binary microbe chemical reaction on the ocean floor, causing chemical contamination comparable only to the fallout of a dirty bomb. And this previous incidents of uses of technology weaponized effective oil set off by the contact of the ocean floor. That due to the basic alkaline natures of the ocean, the majority of those free radicals from the ocean floor became part of the evaporation process, bonding to the neutral pH water until coming in contact with neutral or acidic land and organisms on land, including human populations of the southeastern United States, including this plaintiff, as I was often residing on a sailboat in my charter company in Panama City, Florida, or often camping during the winter of 2011-2012 in the Apalachicola National Forest, where I and a large group of campers exposed for 2 days of rain developed sores. Paragraph I. That enormous enterprise and effort that goes into manufacturing and deploying 1 million gallons of corexit, which is meant to precipitate the 1 billion gallons of effective reactive oil, was no less of enterprise than loading and firing 1 million cannons. Such enterprises cannot be accidental, therefore malicious. Terroristic as the Corexit dumping was done against protest against every sector, including the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, as there was no possible good reason to make the oil precipitate, as it could be addressed and better mitigated on the surface. Paragraph J. That such manipulation, the microbe expected results can be recreated by experiment, craft and design, and in the regular use by BPPLC, therefore an empirical scientific fact, so 100% predictable, a planned attack by PLC, who are even extremely knowledgeable to the chemical components of those concentrations of heavy metals on the ocean floors and those results expected by many experts in the field of oil. Paragraph K. Besides those ongoing toxic free radical side effects of those genomically altered petroleum microbes that are now omnipresent have to be the capacity to those microbes are now omnipresent and have the capacity to genetically engineer or mutate any and all life forms they come in across, essentially a genomic plague, and that they have capacity as a microbe to splice living cells, genomic mobile elements, as have seen as referencing several published scientific journals have confirmed such a genetic as genome sequence and functional genomic analysis of the oil degrading bacterium Olisperia antarctica in discussion by the authors Michael Koob, Tatiana N. Kernenkova, and Yamal Al-Ramaha, and etc. Paragraph I. Basically, besides those possible intentional use as a genomic biological weapon, it is a certainty that those microbes will come into inadvertent contact with other mobile genetic elements, giving rise to mutation storms or plumes. Those same mobile genetic elements, gene splices, which are used by genetic manipulators, engineers to modify corn or make fish glow in the dark, will be picked up by the omnipresent Olisperia antarctica, which is a genetic engineer the size of a microbe, and will proliferate transmutation on anything it affects, such as the plaintiff, with whom has already been affected, might also come in contact with gene splice materials which have become common. Paragraph M. Since Olisperia antarctica was genetically modified to thrive in almost any conditions from frozen to volcanic, it is gram-negative, a double-cell walled, smart bacteria that is nearly impossible to kill any infection of such a modified microbe, nor will it be affected by natural defenses as a fever. Paragraph N. My tests are positive on IgG 41 of the Lyme disease test on 6/4 of 2017, though not Lyme bacteria. Thus, I am infected by a flagella bacteria extremely resistant to antibiotics. Flagella petroleum bacteria is resistant even after years of treatments with a variety of general, broad-spectrum, and specific, very powerful antibiotics. From 2011 to 2013, all doctors diagnosing me believed I had the symptoms of the poisoning to be an infection. I've had years of antibiotics. Further effects are prognosticated but unknown in magnitude, and a variety of specifics as chaotic mutations will begin to appear in areas affected by the plumes. The omnipresent microbe, which has spread all across the earth, will plume on contact with any hydrocarbon, namely the oceans of oil under the continents and oceans. It comes in contact with as a chaos of GMO splices and hydrocarbons will mix and match in a British-made genomic plagues. What's unknown yet is the effect of those on those of us already infected. Paragraph 2. By that paragraph, I1, the use of petroleum microbe and other means, BPPLC introduced an immense amount of heavy metal toxins. BPPLC admitted criminal negligence, and that felony obstruction continued in censorship, misleading, falsifying, and disseminating misinformation about the lack of toxins, where thousands of people confirm heavy metal poisoning. Though misunderstood and mislabeled as the Gulf Blue Plague, sores are symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. Paragraph 3. The malpractice of the healthcare defendants refused adequate necessary medical care, even emergency treatments and proper diagnosis, refusing to even consider causes, or some wouldn't even glance at medical research. Further, intentionally lying to the plaintiff, patient at the time, about conditions and diagnosis and possible causes, then not only that of neglect, caused further harm to the plaintiff in conditions known caused by elemental poisoning, have called by medical research as the damages are insidious and progressive if prolonged. Paragraph 4. The other defendants, healthcare provider and association defendants, betraying the duty of care towards myself and ignoring the cause while continuing to bill, then and be shown they colluded and conspired with BP, criminal, terrorist, felony obstructions of censorship and misinformation as displayed by their intentional tortious actions is obfuscating then as co-conspirators that of terrorism, which has resulted in the harm of innumerable inhabitants of the United States. 4a. By concluding with BP and falsely stating the Deepwater Horizon incidents presented no significant metals. 4ai. The AMA published a journal of misinformation stating that there were no harmful metal contaminants in the oceans due to the Deepwater Horizon oil explosion, virtually repeating word for word the BP PLC public statements, saying there might be some accumulated toxin in the seafood from direct contact with oil, which that much they were forced to say by the multitude of marine biologists whose forever mission is to track and record any change of the chemical compounds of shellfish. 4a2. Each of the healthcare provider defendants, Laura Stoudemire, Jeffrey Nitz, Gregory Finch, Stephen Teague, Christian Turzen, and thereby associated clinics, hospitals, associations, echoed the AMA journal falsified statements saying that there were no heavy metal toxins due to the spill, and further quoting the AMA BP's dissemination of misinformation, asked if I'd been eating seafood, which would give a false positive. There are no false positives of elements in spectroscopy. They are elemental, the most basic of chemistry, which means their misdiagnosis is intentional, knowing that such is harmful as mens rea and actus reus. Subparagraph 3. Their dissemination went so far as a half a dozen of the physician defendants proclaimed that heavy metals would be naturally dispersed and wouldn't be present. I knew from laboratory safety lectures and hazmat experience as a physicist they were lying, indicating to me their malpractice. Heavy metals aggressively accumulate in living tissues. Paragraph B. By complicity hiding those heavy metal poisonings on the population in their diagnosis and test, they, subparagraph 1, Roman numeral 1, by refusing to perform any tissue analysis test of elemental toxins, both in their practice in associations and lobbying to keep the only valid test from either being covered or otherwise provided by practices of association, subparagraph Roman numeral 2, by refusing to acknowledge such tissue test results showing elemental contaminations, either poison or overdose, as each and every one of the healthcare provider defendants, Laura Stoudemire, Stephen Teague, Gregory Finch, Jeffrey Nitz, University of Tennessee Medical Center, Christian Turzen, Tenova La Follette Medical Center, La Follette Medical Center, Tenova Healthcare, and Tenova Cardiology each refused a test I had brought, even in emergency conditions, maliciously ignoring the causal factors while using the conditions to charge for needless and redundant tests, falsely acting as if endless testing was medicine. Subparagraph 3. By switching ineffective false tests such as blood or urine for the only valid test of heavy metal contaminations, that is spectrographic tissue analysis, they produced false negative on the elemental poisoning, which while repeatedly testing for the symptoms. The tissue test rendered all others needless. Subparagraph 4. Not only were the tests they were administering completely inappropriate, therefore unnecessary, they also repeated several tests again and again over a period of a year. The plaintiff consistently asked that whatever requirements to have treatment for the heavy metal toxins be met, only asking for IV chelation. The same expensive endocrine test was performed 4 times in 4 months by the same lab. Tests confirming symptoms without any treatment following are useless. I already know the illnesses were from poison. Subparagraph 5. That in doing so, all those repeated tests by the defendants were unnecessary tests. They have incurred liabilities of the Fraudulent Claims Act and liabilities letting the critical condition go untreated. They unnecessarily delayed while padding their practices unneeded tests and visits, each and every one a fraudulent claim. Paragraph C. Subsequently, during pretrial, the health care provider level defendants constantly sought to censor and move to strike numerous times information of the source of heavy metals in the Gulf of Mexico is from BP, as brought about as new information by this plaintiff, further showing their co-conspiracy in what could only be as cohorts to the BP plc, Great Britain, and that terrorism of both poisoning and overdose of the multitudes in that criminal mastermind dual plot of contaminating and then reaping untold millions as false and unnecessary medical tests and useless procedures, while obfuscating the heavy metals as a source of the multitudes of illnesses, co-conspirators of terrorism and fraud. Paragraph 5. The liabilities of breach of the expected and implied contracts of the medical health care and the malpractice of serially negligent neglect serially by each and every one of the healthcare provider defendants, even in emergency medical conditions during 2017, when the heavy metal toxins had accumulated in the plaintiff's pericardium and was unmitigated by oral chelation, causing intense pain and affecting the cardio organ systems, bring liability which can be administered under those federal statutes of emergency care, which require the proper care of such emergency conditions are transferred to facilities that will treat for the heavy metal poisonings. Arsenic is a severe pain, not alleviated by any pain medicine. Such emergency care is required when the arsenic accumulation, which is noted by the extreme pain, but also the hypertension, which is a constant and recurring emergency caused by the manganese neurotoxin overdose. It can be argued that they wouldn't treat due to the uncovered expense of replacing metallic dental fillings. That would be too expensive for a Medicare patient to pay. But those covered unnecessary test expenses are in excess of that. Postponing a lengthy long of 2 years of medical malpractice in this complaint, just knowing that each and every one of the providing defendants refused to treat an obvious heavy metal poisoning during 2017. That's type 2107. Despite emergency conditions affecting the heart and intense pain. Those logs of several incidents forthcoming as discovery and serial FCA frauds. Those medical defendants well aware of the toxic overdose as the plaintiff brought by hand those analysis and pertinent medical journals entries such as spectrographic tissue analysis of Shane Bruce elemental toxins from 2013 showing the plaintiff poisoned. Various medical and scientific studies of infection caused by the arsenic, as well as varieties of affected and damaged organ systems, those same damages and affected organ systems that they would only confirm and retest endlessly. But the spectrographic tests of the toxicities were already well known before that first visit. How carditis, inflammation of the pericardium and heart, caused abnormal J-wave and produced atypical hypothermia. By toxic inflammation or infection, one of my chronic complaints, apparently a very rare atypical hypothermia, an emergency condition. Subparagraph D. Cardiovascular toxicities upon manganese exposure by Yuming Zhang and Wing Zhang. Extreme hypertension. Subparagraph E. Chelation therapy of manganese intoxication with parasimiladic acid and sprayed dolly rats by Wing Zhu, Yuming Zhang, Yang Shu Zing, and Dallas Corwin. Paragraph 7. All defendants have liabilities brought about such tortious interference, conspiracies, misinformation. Faults and conspiracies are difficult to ascertain. Joint and several liabilities is the avenue on which to litigate. British Petroleum and Great Britain committed tortious inducement of breach of contract. Also have some of these co-defendants or healthcare associations that so affected the required response offices and their express and tacit responsibilities, implied and express contracts to the United States and this then patient, plaintiff. Those response defendants, the Secretary of Defense, the Center of Disease Control, the National Institution of Health, required to actively inquire and act to curtail such conspiracies require more than simply being moved by mass media inducement. Those problems still current, such as elemental contaminations by foreign criminal acts and conspiracies against antidote treatment, which are against the U.S. Constitution and civil rights. Liability for any failure to act to protect the same adoption of standards against invaders causes harm by the RST, Restatement of Tort, Section 286, in jurisdiction by the USC, United States Code 50, Chapter 3, Section 23, by each and every applicable law applicable. Government agencies whose duty, obligation, implied and explicit contracts compel them to do so, cutting through any adversarial or political special interest. Consider the proactive banning worldwide of all genetic modifications that splice is contagious by those microbes. Response required by the DoDs in such circumstances by U.S. Code 50, 32, Section 1522, supersedes and takes precedence over 42 U.S.C. 1395, and some counter-espionage, counter-conspiracy, and an effort to mitigate sabotage and international criminal damage to the U.S. population is applied an explicit contract liability by RST Section 284, failure to act. To the American people, examine the imperatives of the United States Code, Chapter 50, 32, Section 1522, Contact of Chemical and Biological Defense Program. Paragraph 8. British Petroleum is a corporation agent organ of Great Britain, even after privatized in 1987, is well known and documented. That the British Petroleum has ties to the British Secret Intelligence, Cold War, and espionage services is most easily shown as obvious, as Sir John Sawers, once head of the UK's Secret Intelligence Services, MI6, during 2011, was appointed to the British Petroleum Board, serving it and by it, Great Britain, as its chair of its Committee of Safety and Ethics and Environmental Assurance. Britain's highest level of national risk management, exactly where the Cold War is to be suspected, and espionage, particularly bribery, abounds. Demonstrator espionage and counterintelligence and dissemination of misinformation on such a broad scale, including censorship, as only opposing governments would be able to act on the level of the intentional tortfeasors and tortuous interference with implied and explicit healthcare contracts at the nation of the United States. BP shares and board is controlled by those in service of Great Britain, thereby owned by Great Britain and 10% of Great Britain's pension economy, thus limiting or negating sovereign immunity by taking exception pursuant 28 United States Code Section 1603A and 28 U.S. Code Section 1605A2, Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, and Shasta's exceptions provided for this plaintiff by the amended Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. Roman numeral 3. Accounting and liabilities of the defendants. The several and joint liability of each and every one of the defendants to match liabilities, which is accountable for the liabilities of all, and then liabilities due are to be apportioned and counted by each of the defendants severally by tort laws of co-conspirators of neglect and intentional tort. Paragraph 1. FCA liabilities that between 8/2016 and 8/2017, the healthcare defendants charged to insurance and Medicare 29 unnecessary procedures, all pointlessly and ignoring the factoring cause of heavy metal poisoning as the obvious. Having spectrographic tests in the plaintiff's word, they charged $32,570.66 for those needless procedures and are liable for treble damages of their costs to bring the liability of cost up to $97,711.98. Those additional penalties for serial useless procedures and tests of $625,321.20 bring the total due by the FCA, Fraudulent Claims Act, to $723,033.18 to those healthcare providers listed jointly and severally liable, as potentially are those healthcare associations. Paragraph 2 of Accountability and Liabilities. Liabilities to all defendants, RSD 87, contributing tortfeasors of indivisible harm due to the undue expenses of financial damages for the plaintiff's poisoning and subsequent neglect spanning 5 years with a 10-year JASTA liability extension and 2 additional years from the delay caused by the malpractice of the medical health care professions. Subparagraph A. In attempts to manage the toxins on my own between 2013 and 2017 has been in excess of $14,000 in oral antidotes and required corollary supplements, and 2,300 antibiotics between 2011 and 2013, all bought on my own, and some estimated medical expenses include emergency room and physical therapy after being 2 years nearly bedridden in 2012 and 2013, to be another $26,000 between 2011 and 2016 for $42,300. Subparagraph B. Those 7 years of unemployment or delays in educational pursuits, the last 2 years caused by the neglect and drawn out needlessly as those healthcare defendants malpractice, falsely included the idea that antidote treatment would be forthcoming if they were allowed to administer more and more needless tests, are a minimum of expected of $90,000 per year, totaling $630,000. Subparagraph C. In 2018, that travel of 160 round trip to gain toxic management by chelation therapy for some 30-plus treatments will cost the plaintiff $6,000 in gasoline alone, as well as an additional year of unemployable in the 2 days per week in driving, since the local AMA healthcare providers refuse to maintain such treatment in neglect of their practices and emergency locally. Subparagraph D. The actual needed medical expenses due to heavy metal poisoning for a full routine chelation therapy and metallic filling dental replacement are minimally $8,500. Including the calcium manganese blocker, hypertension management during for valid treatment is another $4,000 during delayed treatment, for approximately a total of $12,600. The total liabilities of expenses are $690,900 with quintuple damages by JASTA, that Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism, is $3,454,500. Paragraph 3 of Accountability and Liabilities. Liabilities of defendants due to health conditions, bodily injury, personal injury caused by contamination and drawn-out neglect, which contributes to the long-term ailment, consolidating further expected damages and medical costs is normally estimated in liability suits, not merely malpractice but disinformation, intentional medical malpractice. Subparagraph A. Affected glandular systems, $100,000. Subparagraph B. Affected nervous system, chronic hypertension, $100,000, including fatigue. Subparagraph B2. Memory, executive cognitive abilities, $100,000. Subparagraph 3B3. Expected motor functions being affected, $100,000. Subparagraph 3C. Affected lung and heart organ systems, $100,000. Paragraph 3D. Years of untreated carcinogenic, $100,000. Subparagraph 3E. Infection by a genetically modified microbe with unknown effects, $100,000. 3F, totaling $700,000 in liability to the defendants in personal injury. Paragraph 4, that the combined paragraphs of Roman number 1, 2, and Roman number 2, 4, that additional penalties of $25,000 on each of the healthcare providers failing to treat or transfer imposes further liability of $225,000 by the Federal Emergency Care. Paragraph 5. Real liabilities of defendants sued by the plaintiff is $5,793,433, of which a portion is due to the federal government and FCA liabilities from the listed defendants, other portions due to Medicare and to the Partnership of Medicare Insurance Blue Cross Blue Shield as reimbursement for their reimbursement or recall of payments. Paragraph 6. Plaintiff asked for another 10% compensating intense pain, mental anguish caused by the defendants of $579,000 and causing and neglecting such poisoning as arsenic, neurotoxins by manganese overdose, the veritable chemical causes of pain and mental anguish, as well as despair at the state of the United States and abuse of the medical health care by the defendants. Restatement of torts. Section 46. Outrageous conduct causing severe emotional distress. Withholding antidote while spending years in demands for billing, FCA, comparable to terrorism, they're showing no interest in the value of human life or suffering, as demonstrated by the harassing tactics by those malpracticing medical defendants that include the plaintiff's family. This plaintiff incorporates any and every law which and civil processes which might be applied on my behalf to find in this complaint for the total liabilities of the defendants, as of course to effect multipliers and proportional liabilities upon the defendants as applicable, and entail restitution to me, Shane Bruce, the federal government, Medicare, and Medicare partnership providing medical insurance agencies and Blue Cross Blue Shield as equitable. Signed, Shane Bruce. Service on 8 addresses of attorneys already present. These medical defendants, healthcare providers. I had mentioned it to the court that my father was also suffering from arsenic poisoning and asked for an injunction for treat or transfer. The judge says my being a individual couldn't only represent myself and not my father was the primary reason. But the defending lawyers, such as White and Bond of Hodges Daugherty and Carson in Knoxville, or Clarence Gideon in Nashville, Gideon Cooper in Essary, realized that the defendants had a hostage of my father. They proceeded to alert the defendants that they were being sued, and I was probably visiting my father and that my father was in their care. They set up subsequent harassing tactics, calling the law while I was visiting my father there for 9 hours, separating him, discontinued his care from ICU, and put him in a nursing home where he couldn't receive proper care. Even though he was having his lungs having to be expirated, where they put a tube into his lungs and sucked out liquid, and he was able to walk, stand, and walk around. 2 weeks later, after malicious harassing abuse of the courts, where they stopped me from seeing my own dad, placing injunctions of my co-defendants against Dr. Stoudemire or Teague or Rasnick, which had worked in those places of the hospitals where my dad was at and transferred to, kept me from being there and trying to get him that necessary and vital treatment of IV chelation therapy, which would have saved his life. He died within 3 weeks, even though, and I think because, I had said he would die for a certainty without that antidote treatment. Doctors, lawyers, hospitals, courts, and judges then pursued the tactic of harassing me, blocking me from my father and him from my advocacy. It is no less than a conspiracy of murder by the courts. They killed my father just out of spite because I had made them defendants in a civil action in a Cold War where I could only say that with their conspiracies of murder and traitorous activities in supporting BP against the American people, I filed an action. The limit of lawful civil activities in an unoccupied nation, in an occupied nation where the BP is bribed and harassed and threatened their way to willful extermination, whether it's just poisoning mass populations and antidote is being withheld, as that carrot of malpractice is being commenced by these AMA Association members. The AMA was actually charged for felony racketeering back in the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s. They basically have no precept of, or I say they have no duty towards patient care. It is a racketeering organization of physicians for fraudulent and felony or fraudulent physicians who've banded together and lobbied to extort and fraudulently claim against the people of the United States. That's kind of well known. Anyways, I thought I'd read the complaint. I've written a book, I'll link this paper, but I've written a book called The God Microbe, where I've ranted a little bit, but by necessity. I'm affected with the poison myself. I have pain. I've been chelating. I spent 2 years in bed. The last 3 or 4 years I've been up and around since I started oral antidotes. I'm far from well, and reading something, I realize I've missed a word again and again, no matter how many times I read it. It is having a difficult time. And I've seen pleas of people, videos of people twitching back in 2010, and their pleas went unnoticed by an occupied and otherwise traitorous group of controlling interests. But I thought I would post this video. Those of you who have access to the federal courts or wish to propagate it and publish it ought to look up the case Bruce versus Great Britain and take a look at some of the stuff that's been going on, being said. I think I said one of my mental anguish was the state of the United States. And that's amid a lot of anguishes, a lot of grievances. Shane Bruce. Do you think I'll win? A little. They call it pro se per. The first 100 years, anybody could sue through the courts, even on behalf of another individual. A few associations later of lawyers and doctors. And I have judges saying that they wouldn't even listen to me without a lawyer present in the circuit court of Tennessee. Nobody expects much of Tennessee. Former officer of Tennessee and employer research through federal contracts. No one expects anything of Tennessee except for, well, badness. Well, the thing was, I think it was explained to me a couple weeks ago that generations of indentured servants fled to this area, deserters, and et cetera, and it became a culture of anti-establishment, even by officials. But this is nationwide. It's not just one state. It's several. It's the United States has been affected. AFFECT, as in made ill. A long time, very short time since Revolutionary War as things go. Read my works. Make a study of it. It might be educational.